Welcome to NeuroNoodle's Neurofeedback and Neuropsychology podcast featuring tech legend Jay Gunkelman. He's the man who has read well over 500,000 brain scans, and Dr. Marie Swingle, author of iMinds. Our goal is to provide information and promote options for better mental health. The NeuroNoodle podcast is supported by listeners and businesses just like you. Hey everyone, if you're enjoying the show and want to help us keep it going, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Your support helps improve the content and brings on great guests and grow the show. Join us on Patreon at patreon.com/NeuroNoodle. But hey, if supporting financially isn't in the cards right now, no worries. You can still help us out for free by liking, subscribing, and sharing this episode. It really makes a difference and helps more people find the show. If we've earned it, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Hey, Gunkel.
It's morning.
Top of the morning to you, my friend.
Well, it's kind of the middle of it for me. I get going pretty early. So
how are the west winds? The Suisun City west winds. Is it hot, cold? Is it?
There's so many people having such. I mean, Nashville. I mean, holy. All the trees coming down and trees exploding, and there are parts of the South that just aren't equipped. I mean, Fargo moves snow. When you can get 6 feet of snow, Fargo will have the streets cleaned in a day. And it's not an issue. And even during a nasty blizzard, all the main roads are open, and they do center of the road plow through the side streets. But they'll go through and they'll be plowing, and they have a gate that drops down so they don't plow everything into the front of your driveway.
Yeah. And
then the gate rises again, and all the snow is tossed just past your driveway. So they after you're done shoveling your driveway, they don't cover the end. These poor people, and I'm not going to gloat. I mean, it's a sunny day. It's going to be in the 60s, and
7 degrees here, Jay. Thanks.
I heard that with wind chill, which they did not calculate when I was a kid. Let's say Florida's got spots that are going to be down below zero for wind chill. Now that doesn't mean that their absolute temperature is going to be there, but wind chill drop you quite a bit. Yeah,
these snow days. Today. With all the advancements, I can't believe we're taking time off. And in North Dakota, I mean, it's got to be 100 below if you're going to take.
They very seldom. They have some snow days scheduled for school where they can end up calling some and still fill their quota for the number of hours taught and everything. So there's some lenience in that respect, because you got to honor Mother Nature. You don't want to have kids, out necessarily at minus 40 during the acute aspect of a windstorm. So NDSU students around campus, UND had a hockey game last night, and they were in the middle of a blizzard. I saw pictures across the street of students walking on the sidewalk to go to the hockey game. You could barely see that there was somebody walking on the other side of the street. The blizzard is so intense, And then they showed video of people leaving the hockey game out into the blizzard to go to their cars and stuff. So, and it's a spot where you have parking lots that have electrical outlets. Not for electric cars, but for the heaters for the motor. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to start your car.
Jay, for those of us lucky to be in the Midwest or the East and have to bundle up and wear caps, and when we go outside and we come back in and we take off our knitted hat and then our hair stands on end, and then we have to do a neurofeedback EEG. How does that mess up the recording? Does anything happen with that? Static electricity?
Static electricity is not really an issue for it. You put on a ground electrode, and that takes care of that. Actually, it's an interesting issue. Historically, the amplifiers that they had that had field effect transistor front ends, if you hooked up an electrode, not the ground first, but an electrode first, and then you hooked up the ground, you would create a circuit for the field effect transistor to get hit with the DC current, and you would blow out the amplifier. So it was not an uncommon error to not have hooked the ground first. Nowadays, no amp is going to have an issue with electrodes being hooked up first or last. So you don't have FET amp front ends.
Well, that was the question I had. It's not one that came up last night. HRV was a big one in neurofeedback. They're talking about overlap.
Surprisingly, all the people that used to call those things peripheral measures missed the fact that we're all central to the whole thing, and the heart and the brain have interaction. The vagal nerve from the brain can slow the heart. There's an interaction. Actually, there's a cardiac event-related potential that you can see within the EEG. That's not to say that there aren't also EKG artifacts. People that have a thick chest, short neck, rugby players, soccer,
Yeah.
you, for an
I know
instance.
I know the type, yeah.
I bet your cardioballistic is
Ballistic.
spike, 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 spike for every electrical event of the heartbeat. And if you were a ballet dancer and a long, thin, on the other hand, you'd see very little of that. The cardioballistic sharp, the electrical event of the EKG is just not there. It's due to the structure. It's not anything other than that. And then there's also slow pulse artifact where there's an electrode sitting next to a blood vessel, and it slightly rocks the electrode as the pulse pressure dilates the blood vessel. So that slight pulse pressure ends up giving you an cardiac related impedance shift, and some of the slow content there is just due to electrode contact shift. And you can see it's extracranial. There's no appropriate field or phase to it.
Alpha blocking came up, EEG reactivity, Jay. What exactly happens neurologically?
Alpha blocking?
Yeah. When eyes open and alpha disappears, the Berger effect, your buddy. Any clinical implications if it's absent or typical?
Alpha with the eyes closed is what you expect at the back of the head because you put the visual system into a resting state. The default mode network resting state is turned on with the eyes closed resting. Now, from the amount that you have at the back of your head, 01, 02 PZ is where we're looking. You might have alpha all over everywhere else, but we're looking at the back of the head for the alpha that we're looking to respond to the eye opening. Now, we expect attenuation by 50% or more, but they assume you have some in the first place. There are people that have very little alpha in the first place, and they don't really have responsive alpha. Not everybody has alpha that responds. In fact, there is a phenotype of non-responsive eye-opening alpha doesn't respond. It's a particularly nasty disconnect from the outside world when opening your eyes. You don't have any relationship to the outside world. Your alpha doesn't even react.
Psychedelics versus targeted neurofeedback. I'm sure you'd love to comment on how we need more plasticity.
Before we go to that,
Okay.
Alpha should attenuate by 50% or more, but it can also block. And when you open your eyes, if your salience network kicks in your central executive network. Your default mode network, which includes alpha, is defeated. It just is turned off. And you'll probably be making eyes open lambda because you're focused. And you might be hypervigilant and you'd be lambda, 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 lambda at the back of the head. But your alpha blocks if you're having hypervigilance. And, you know, not everybody has alpha. Again, Adrian had alpha. Matthews had an EEG with no apparent rhythmicity, is what they called it. We call it a low voltage fast EEG now. The lack of background resting alpha is essentially an over-arousal. And if you give them some GABA, which slows the background alpha rhythm, and they're up beyond 16 hertz where they desynchronize, that's the low voltage fast EEG. If you give them GABA, it slows down the tuning, and alpha will emerge at the back of the head, initially as very fast alpha, and then it slows even further with a little bit more GABA.
Are you ready for your psychedelics?
Oh, yeah, psychedelics.
Google and YouTube will like that.
Yeah, I did a drug workshop one time. Everybody, and I stepped in and I said, I'm sure half of you are disappointed. This is not an experiential workshop. uh, you know, psychedelics are a way to dramatically influence the brain. Um, uh, People that are used to looking at the effect of a medication on the EEG don't really see dramatic EEG effects typically. However, a hallucinogen, on the other hand, can have really quite dramatic effects on brain connectivity. They're usually a strong stimulant and have dramatic impacts on either the very fast or very slow aspects of the EEG in order to have you have altered consciousness. Salvia divinorum works on the low frequency end, and you can have a 600 to 1,000 microvolt, 6 to 10 hertz long, 6 to 10 second long wave. These are very, very gigantic, slow waves, probably glial in nature. And during those, the person is not here. The Salvia divinorum trip is a total dissociation from reality. But those kinds of things end up giving you changes in your connectivity. Now, there you have to realize that a stimulant is the nature of the drug as an underlying nature. It's going to be a neural stimulant. That's not safe for everybody. What we found is that if you have epileptiform content in EEG, doing DMT or MDMA or psilocybin or any ketamine, any of those is a risk. It's not a guarantee that you're going to have a bad outcome. It's a gigantic risk. The other contraindication, other than epileptiform content, it's more of a precaution than a contraindication, actually. And both of them are actually precautions. It's not that everybody that has epileptiform content is going to have a bad experience because of the use of a hallucinogen. And there's actually some evidence that very, very low dose LSD may in fact be a benefit for people with epilepsy. Larry Rouse had a government contract to do studies on that in 1974, if I'm not mistaken, and his funding was pulled. That's about the time the government's early LSD studies, the mistakes of giving milligram instead of microgram dose. The all that came out, and all LSD stuff was just pulled. His work on low dose LSD as an anticonvulsant wasn't executed. It had been approved as a study, but again, all LSD study stuff was pulled at that point.
Believe it or not, we went on a tangent from that, Jay, talking about how kids today aren't drinking alcohol anymore, that they're getting more into the weed stuff that's not alcohol. And we were just wondering if you could look in your crystal ball, what do you think the future EEG recordings will look like if we're drinking less alcohol and doing more weed?
Well, to start with, chronic weed, if you're a very, very heavy chronic weed user versus a very, very heavy chronic alcohol user, there's a difference in outcome. There's a very, very heavy chronic alcohol user has a Korsakoff syndrome, which is a form of dementia, as a high probability as an outcome. You can end up with a diffuse encephalopathy that's irreversible, and there's liver issues and things like that, and ischemia for hangovers, but THC ends up having impacts on EEG as well. So it's not like alcohol is a great option as an alternative.
Yeah.
They're pointing to none at all to be not a bad choice. So anyway, the THC has an acute effect, and then it has a chronic effect. And this is work by Struve, Struve. Dr. Struve's work is very well done. He doesn't have a political agenda going in. He professionally recruits healthy, screened, normal subjects that are naive, and he gets them to be chronically exposed. And they're paid subjects, and they're tested as normal people, as opposed to trying to find a bunch of people that are chronically stoned. And there's some other things that may have kind of guided them into that circumstance. So it's a real good way to do a study, is to do a professional recruited subject study. And he looked at the acute and chronic effects. The acute effect is to slow the background alpha. And that's why people use it a bit for sleep. It slows the background alpha, so it helps you kind of doze off and wind down your arousal level. So it helps you fall asleep a bit. The chronic effect, on the other hand, is to increase the coherence frontally. Not everybody has the luxury of getting away with increasing that coherence without a side effect. If you have some alpha hovering at the level, upper level of what can be acceptable, and you increase that by the use of the THC, you may put yourself into a clinical category. So you may experience an affective regulatory circumstance of a depressed mood or an apathy or amotivation, and that's not uncommon. Now, not everybody has a problem with that. You might have very fast alpha and not have high coherence. And for that person, they may be a chronic user, pardon me, without necessarily suffering badly. Stay alive.
Stay alive. Yeah. What about disassociation and weed? Somebody said it felt like they're in a video game.
Well, again, frontal lobe increases in coherence and slowing of the background alpha. As your background alpha slows, actually your perceptual resolution drops somewhat. If you don't drop way slow, it's not a particularly noticeable effect. but there is an effect of a decreased arousal, and you also have increased alpha up front, and that can end up having all sorts of changes in your perceptual judgment of things. So it's not, all of your awareness is essentially frontal. You perceive and become aware. The 200 millisecond arrival of the event-related potential is when you're actually aware of the stimulus. You're not aware of what the stimulus is until the 300 millisecond level. And for the P300, but at 200 milliseconds, you do have frontal awareness of it. With a second ERP, you can have conscious awareness. Once you lay down a memory trace, then no. If you have another perception and a memory trace, then it's a conscious awareness.
If you got to pick your poison, this is kind of where it was going is, okay, alcohol, you're dealing with inflammation, you have that's own issues. THC, you got a half-life issue. What you take now, 6 hours from now, mate, that plays a role. But
THC Half Life is a long half-life. It's stored in it's a fat stored. It's not a water soluble circumstance, so it's stored long term, and you've got weeks to months, depending upon how much exposure.
And then the negative of weed that we were chatting about was somebody came on and said, well, if I do weed, then I become very paranoid or anxious. Is something going up in the front?
That's frontal. They're having frontal alpha hypercoherence, and it's not uncommon. And for them, it's not a good thing. Now they may be able to do it as a one-time thing, and but if they do it on an ongoing basis, the coherence is going to go high, and that can be triggered. And again, long half-life.
We had Saul popping in, Dr. Saul.
Oh, great!
He came in every Wednesday, 6 p.m. Central, Jay, 4 p.m. Pacific. We all get together, and whoever's around, whoever's free, whoever doesn't have the whole day booked reading EEGs like somebody I know.
So,
and we'll make this one a short one, Jay. But you posted a video. You have a lot of free videos that you have on your Facebook page, and you just posted one of one of your mentors.
Karl.
We're here with Dr. Karl Pribram. You came from a very different background of neuroscience and neurosurgery, and you have brought a lot to that field, and I think our field owes you some of the background of what we do to your work. But I know you don't do biofeedback, and I'm curious what you get out of being around this field. What do you get from biofeedback, and what do you see?
Take a look at him. That's what I see. People here, they're practitioners, and so they see problems that need solving. I find going to conferences is sort of like postdoctoral education. You go, and if you learn nothing else, you learn how to present your own views in a context, find the right words so that you can portray, like you did this morning. These take you practice. You have to try it, say it this way, say it to make yourself understandable. So if nothing else, when I speak, I learn how to express what I have been thinking about. But the other part, of course, is that other people are doing the same thing, and so you learn from them ways of expressing some of your own ideas.
You have been I think called a maverick at times throughout your career for some of the theories and for the work that you've helped pioneer. We, as a field, are treated somewhat as mavericks. And I wondered if you had any words of wisdom or perspective to offer a struggling maverick field.
Sure. If you think you're right, keep at it. After a year at Yale, we discovered the excitability of what's now called the limbic system. We used to call it the olfactory brain, electrically stimulating, and it gives rise to blood pressure changes, gastrointestinal changes, heart rate changes, all of that. Well, big, huge finding. Some Nobel laureates wrote in and said, Dr. John Fulton, who was my chief, he said, this is bullshit. They're stimulating the dura. That's why they're getting all these things. John was enough of a guy to say, he owned a journal of neurosurgery, of neurophysiology, and he published this. Well, 3 years later, every graduate students at Yale and everywhere else are doing stuff on so-called limbic systems. So I overcame that one. When we wrote plans of structure of behavior, one of the reviews said, these guys have been working out in California. They obviously had sunstroke. Another one was a more favorable review. It said most people don't get senile until they're at least 60. These guys aren't even 40 yet. So that's a kind of review where 10 years later, it had changed the whole field. Every president of the APA, American Psychological, had mentioned it at least once, if not 2 or 3 times. And the thing took off about 5 years later, back 10 years later, and now it's a classic. In fact, that's where I'm going in Sacramento to help discuss what's happened to the whole idea of cognitive psychology and cognitive neuroscience. So we had a symposium at Stanford, a mini symposium on holographic ideas. It was a very nice conference. Some of the people pointed out some very nice things that I hadn't thought of, and so on and so forth. But most of them said, this is all bullshit. They came out of biology, they came out of psychology, the engineers were there, everybody was there, and they just said, you don't know what you're talking about, the brain is, these things can't have anything to do with the brain. And afterwards, one of the graduate students, anyway, he and I held forth, and we acknowledged, they hadn't thought of this, and that's a good objection. I mean, it was very open, easy discussion. Another grad student came up to me after and said, well, how could you stand on that? Everybody's saying you're wrong. Very simple. I've always been right. Brain and perception's only been out 10 years now, and nobody's paying any attention to it at all. It's not an easy book, but it's got all the data reviewed. They're out there. And that's why I wrote it. It was meant to be a technical book. Language is Brain, when I wrote it, was meant to be a book for engineers. And they have just, because recently at a meeting, engineering meeting in Orlando, and a lot of South Americans came, and 3 presidents of universities came who were engineers. And they all gathered around me, and I was asked to be the honorary president of the whole meeting, which I didn't know, which meant I had to give a talk the next morning after I got there at 8 o'clock at night. But anyway, they all gathered around and said, we were raised on language is the brain. All of them had read it when they were in school, and they knew all this stuff. So, of course, it was translated into Spanish and Portuguese.
In this field of neurofeedback, there are many competing different approaches to helping move and shift the brain. Many people often feel their particular approach is the right approach. It seems like many different people are getting very good success with different approaches. And we don't know enough
I don't think, to know. Do you have any perspective for us?
Yeah, they probably all were right. I mean, they're getting some results. The problem is that any new therapy always works. The newness of it. All of a sudden, somebody's paying attention to you. And the outcome can be, in psychiatry, it's usually 1/3 get very much better, 1/3 sort of get better, and 1/3 don't get better. And that's for any therapy that's ever been used. And the other thing is, different people need different kinds of therapy. So if one kind doesn't work for somebody, they go shopping until something does work, hopefully. And what's lacking in this field is any kind of field that's clinical. So there's no good diagnostic. We don't have good diagnostic categories. And so we can't tell Joe Blow, oh, you go over here and he'll be able to help. Oh, what you're doing, the next fellow comes in and says, that won't do you any good. If you go see him, he'll do better or her.
There's many different ways to get there.
That's right, and these are so often called placebo effects, but they're not just placebo effect. They really are effective, but for different reasons for different people.
You shared with us a copy of your brain map, your very unique and different brain map. And you see the changes in amplitude rapidly shifting, which we now show in our courses, and people are just amazed. Can you tell us a little more about why that evolved and what that represents?
Very simple. Setting up a new lab in Virginia after being at Stanford for 30 years. And we had new equipment, supervised students from Virginia Tech getting their degrees. And they laughed, with the stuff that we brought along. Everything right now, I've always given away my lab to my students every 5 years at least. But in this field, with computers now, 5 years is a long time. I brought tapes, IBM tapes and stuff like that. Nobody can read them. Nobody can read my floppies now. I mean, so you have to redo the whole lab over and over. Well, so we're setting up new stuff, new equipment, and so on. And we needed to see if it worked. So I said, okay, I'm tired, moving and all of this. And I fell asleep part of the time, and I sat down, and I got up. That was a very happy time. Next thing I knew, this engineer from China, Jay, handed me these things and says, this is what your EEG looks like. I said, what? That was just a tremendous surprise. None of us suspected that the EEG changes are, what we call the pop-up rate is just incredibly fast, 100 to 150 times a second. And then, of course, came the science. How do we measure it? As you heard this morning, if you can't measure it, it's not science. And so we devised a way of making maps, which are the maps where we connect this every 2 milliseconds. Here's the highest amplitude. Here's the next 2 milliseconds. We draw a line. Here's the next one. We draw a line. And so we make these maps, and they're unique to people, pretty much, and unique to the problem that they're trying to solve. We're able to make some science, and we've done, that's what I presented here, 3 or 4 other techniques that have come from that, such as measuring complexity and measuring using factor analysis to sort of check on, each technique sort of checks on the other one and sees if we get the same thing. What we found is things go even faster in older people. Their reaction time, their behavior slows down, brains go faster.
More complexity.
There's more complexity, exactly. At the same speed, they go at the same speed, but there's more complexity to what they're processing.
And what does more complexity mean?
Very good. I wrote 3 papers saying, I don't know what the hell people mean by complexity. It's just a bunch of words and so on. We know from fractal geometry that you take one level, one scale, and go to another one, can be just as diverse. So what did we want for the EEG? One of my friends, again, and I had in fact published on this many, many years ago. It's what I call the structure of redundancy. Instead of looking at how much information, how much reduction of uncertainty goes on, there are repetitions. So if you have A, B, A, B, A, B, that gives you a certain amount of information. A, B, B, A, B, B, A, B, B gives you the same amount of information. A, B, 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 C, same amount of information. It's the structure of the redundancy. A double A is not like a single A, is not like a triple A, is not like a fivefold A. Well, this makes a big difference because if it's just 1 or 2, the redundancy is either 0, which would be 1, or 2, or 3. If it's in that ballgame, the front part of the brain and the medial parts, the limbic areas, make it very difficult for the animals to do that. But when you get to 5 or more, they do it by using a discrimination. They go to the back of the head and use that. So it's and I did those experiments years and years ago, and I talked about structure of redundancy about that. Well, it turns out that if you take the levels, and what you do is you give each redundant, anything that's repeated over and over again, you give it a new label. So let's say A, B, A, B, B. If A repeats, or A, B repeats, then you say, this is X. And if another one comes in that's A, B, C, A, B, C, A, B, C, A, B, C, you give that a Y. And so you have another one. Then you look at see if X and Y repeat. X, Y, X, Y, X, and if you see a repetition, you give that a new label, like N and N. That's the way you study the structure of redundancy. That's complexity. So I had to write another paper.
Complexity, what does it mean in a practical standpoint?
Practical standpoint, you've got to look at different levels. It deals with the structure of redundancy, not just the redundancy, but how the different scales, levels of redundancy, it gives you a hierarchical structure. Okay. So the diversity at any one level can be the same as the next one, but that structure is different.
Jay, did you have a comment on that, or just questions? You might have had a comment.
I think Hjorth's descriptors, the slope descriptors by Hjorth in the field of EEG, speak to complexity, a derivative of something like you have a distance. The derivative of distance is speed, miles per hour, and then you have the derivative of that, which is acceleration, miles per hour, and you end up with higher levels of derivation. And Hjorth's descriptors of the EEG were activity, there's 8 hertz activity, mobility, what's the activity across this frequency spectrum, and then complexity, and these are higher levels of derivation. I think this brings to the EEG literature, which is kind of an obscure EEG literature, I must admit. Hjorth's works are not exactly intro, but they're also, I think, well published in the field of EEG. This brings complexity to the EEG world. The other thing is, was it 2 years ago now, I believe, they actually had a fellow who used a measurement of complexity and fed it back and found that individuals could actually control. You could show a learning curve in your complexity. So when you're talking about biofeedback, increase in complexity that occurs with, some people would say aging, but I would say maturation of the brain, the development of the brain, which does not stop when you're 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 or 22.
Well, it stops briefly in the sophomore year when you know everything.
Oh, that was the year I entered the field and I thought I knew something. It was a good illusion while it lasted.
Yeah, so you see there are roots to this that go back to simple calculus of differentiation and integration and so on. So these are all roots.
Yeah.
And we did, you can use complexity measure power spectral density. And it's really, what you do is you draw a line across where the amount of power is, in which frequency band. And if it's a straight line like that going up to the higher frequency, this is normal pretty much. If you've got an ADD, it gets flatter and sometimes even goes down, but only here, not back here. Actually, these were adult ADD people gotten off any medication. But it was, for me, it wasn't publishable because just a few cases. So but we did that. And there are all kinds of ways that you can use the EEG in very, very effective ways. And if you two try to do the same with your computer, put a few electrodes on the case of the computer, try to figure out what program's running, you're going to have a hell of a time. And we do it here, and we find out all kinds of things. I have another story about an earlier question you asked. We were promoting somebody at Stanford who was an EEG person, from associate to full professor. Made his name into very beautiful work. Nothing outstanding, but even when he was at the VA, he wasn't in the tenure faculty. He wasn't in the same group as the tenure faculty, so it wasn't quite as difficult. But the calls I got from the other faculty were not in brain science or anything like that. Is this really science that this guy is doing? Looking at all those wiggles? I mean, this is not long ago. 15 years ago.
15 years ago.
Yeah, the EEG isn't real. Only if you got electrodes down in the brain are you really looking at something real.
First of all,
EEG is
and
some
secondly,
epiphenomenon.
even that isn't real unless you get spikes.
Yeah.
With the microelectrode, everything is microelectrode.
Yeah.
So lots of what I've done is all microelectrode that has led to it. But the EEG and the DC stuff, you get DCs off of oak trees. Yeah. Burrs and work. Yeah, I mean, that's where I was introduced to it. And plants have good DC potentials. And there were some, a puzzle, a botanist was his office or something, and he was seeing people and stuff, and these plants every once in a while had this huge DC shift. I mean, just horrendous. What was going on? Who was doing what? And so on. Couldn't figure out for weeks. But they sat there and really monitored it. They finally found out what it was. The ladies' room was next door, and wherever they flushed the toilet, the plants had this tremendous DC shift. I mean, these things have been played with and known for years and years.
Do you think our field, and I know this is actually a question for both Jay and Karl, do you think it's important for our field to expand and add DC? If it's a fundamental part of all systems, nobody in the United States to speak of is currently training DC. Is this the direction of the future?
If I'd had time, I would have gotten up and congratulated.
Well, you congratulated me and called me Dr. Freud at the end.
Exactly. If I did get on the tape. Freud had his whole model. 1895, I've written a whole book on it. The double thing, attention is a double feedback. You have to get what's coming in, reflect it down into what he called the primary brain or basal ganglia, and back up again. It's so close to what he's talking. Now, the reason
and cathexis and cathode.
Yeah,
that's the source of the name.
But he never used the term, but whoever translated him already knew it was a negative term. There's a real history to this. Beginning in about 1930s, we began to get push-pull amplifiers. And the reason for that is those damn drifts. They go way over, and you've got to readjust the whole equipment every little while. So we get push-pull amplifiers, and they cancel out all the DC. And so after 1930 till I started talking about things like that in about the 1950s,
it was ignored.
Almost.
It was removed.
You couldn't see it. You got rid of it. It was a damned artifact. But it was a galvanometer, which is what they used in the 1890s. And by the way, Freud's publisher, the major journal in the field, that was his field, is studying DC potentials in the brain. This was all known. Vienna was a pretty good place to be in the 1890s. They were smart. That and Harvard with William James, and they had very similar models.
So what we've forgotten about DC is now going to emerge as being an important part of system regulation.
First of all, even slower, other fields that are not all the way to DC are coming back. They're now called field potentials. I call them local graded potentials, which is an awkward name in language's brain in 71. But they are called field potentials, and everybody's okay with them. But they're still gotten from electrodes laid onto the brain or inserted. The EEG is in the scalp, and it's another level removed from what we call field potentials. But the EEG is made up completely of field potentials and DC. It does not record. There are a few spike components that get in there, about 1% maybe. All the rest is field DC stuff.
And the Europeans have taken the direct current field in neurofeedback and done well with slow cortical potentials.
One of my students, John Stam, with whom I published the initial stuff on DC, he then went to Vienna, and they applied it to school, to the teaching, and they would look at the fluctuation of the alpha rhythm in people, in kids, and they would teach them only during the cathode.
During the excitatory phase of the waveform.
Or the inhibitory. And they found that kids learned about 2 or 3 times as fast. And I learned, my monkeys where I messed up the DC, took 7 times as long. But once they started learning, the learning slope was identical to those who didn't. It's this period of stationarity beforehand. And that's true of children who have problems and learning problems and so on. It's that period of stationarity, whatever is going on there, and then it just takes up. It's that switch you were talking about.
So does that mean that coupling DC, that is, if you can get, for example, EEG activation to occur, mapped with a certain DC pattern, that produces a more powerful learning effect?
It has to do with attention, intention, and thinking. And as you said this morning, attention is getting something from the outside. You're paying attention, and you pay. It takes, cost. Pay attention. Intention is what you pay to do something. You have to make a choice. I'm going to move my finger in your example, or I'm not. So intention is out, and I define thought as attention or intention to memory. It's internal. That's what it deals with.
That's what DC deals with.
That's what.
Yeah. And the motor aspect of it being intention, the sensory aspect of it being the intention to perceive,
I talk
or
about
attention.
Yeah.
The Europeans training slow cortical potentials are way ahead of the United States, obviously. And they've under-attended to the oscillatory EEG for feedback over there, primarily the Niels Birbaumers' work out of Germany.
Yeah.
Fabulous work, obviously with a great literature behind it, very current literature. Placebo-controlled, randomized designs, well accepted, published in major journals, Epilepsia and so forth. So
Vienna group the
they're
same
excellent.
way. In sleep, your DC goes way down. Interestingly, it goes up a little, but not as much in meditation as you'd expect. Because meditation, what they should have done is hypnosis. That's where it should go. Way up.
Yeah, exactly. The meditation research at this point shows powerful oscillatory gamma activity in Davidson's current work up near 80 hertz. But luckily, with the current model that we're working on, our current groping, as it were, ties both the very slow and the very fast together. And the literature here is referred to as a bispectrum, which is looking at the correlational relationship across the frequency spectrum at one spot. Similar to coherence, looking at two spots and how they're covariating across the spatial domain. This is looking across the frequency domain of the location. So this is an important metric of looking across from the very slow to the very fast, because the rhythms appear to nest in the slower frequency has little packets of the fast frequencies embedded in them. And that's what we see in consciousness. And it's not what we see in unconsciousness. As I say, this is a metric that's been FDA registered.
And that nesting is the measure of redundancy and complexity.
All of the redundancy and all of the complexity that we see out here, we're still putting on electrodes. And one of the big arguments in the field is, it's important where you put the electrodes, or it's not important where you put the electrodes.
As long as you have enough of them.
As long as you have enough of them.
And I think 128, for some, if you're looking at the details, if you put 120 electrodes over one side of the frontal lobes, that can really help you. But 19 or so give you this picture already on the surface that may be enough. So the dense electrode array. These are all technical things.
But you started out in the field as being very much a localizationist. You cut things out as a neurosurgeon.
That's right.
And you gave up neurosurgery in the late 40s, if I recall, or early 50s approximately.
As soon as I got my boards.
There you go. But you came from this localization background of having been taught this is here and this is there, and everything's
got the brain tumors. We didn't have X-rays. We didn't have EEGs. No EEGs, mind you.
Yes.
So we did everything on the basis of localization of symptoms.
Yeah. And from that very localized background, you've moved to a very much a distributed model for memory. So distributed that your model, talking about memory as a hologram, it's so distributed that your memory doesn't stop at your skin. It's an interference pattern, and it continues across infinite time-space.
And this was a DC shift.
Yes.
I met Lashley. I was looking for a place to do surgery, away from hay fever zone. So I was looking at Duluth, and I was looking down Florida, far away from. Anyway, so I landed in Jacksonville, Florida, and Yuri's lab was right there, so I called up Lashley. He was in charge of it. I said, could I possibly meet you? I'd sort of like to do some research. It's just what we need. And so we met, and I said, Dr. Lashley, I'm so pleased to meet you. I read your book on brain intelligence, and you're still alive. I said, you still believe this stuff that you wrote in your book? He said, yes, of course. I said, well, that was rat stuff. I mean, it couldn't possibly apply to humans. And I said, and by the way, what I was taught essentially makes this book worth about 10 cents. And that's where I bought it in a second-hand bookstore. And he had great sense of humor. We did this all the way through. I mean, he teased me and I teased him. I put a lot of that in the book. It was such a wonderful relationship. And so we decided on monkeys. And chimpanzees has been intermediate between rats and people. And then when I got to Virginia, I had to decide, we work with rats and with people. And sometimes I had to tell the difference, and it was very difficult. Most people behave like rats, and some rats we took home, and they're very nice people. So, I mean, anyway. So that's how I really, Lashley was probably, other than my father, who was already there as a scientist, my whole family. Those were my primary influences. And Lashley just turned me upside down. And we did this program, and nobody understood it. Lashley was much wiser than the Lashley-ites. I mean, he was talking about a particular kind of problem in psychology. He knew the difference between the front of the brain and the back of the brain. Well, and he said so in a letter to Nectar. So I've got lots of that in my book. So, but there are certain aspects like being able to write with your left hand first time and things of that kind, which cannot be explained on a localization basis. It's called motor equivalence. Or memory store, distributed memory store. Perception. We had no idea how perception did. So that was big shit, and I learned.
Yeah. And some of these non-local things end up bringing all sorts of implications that become kind of spooky for some scientists.
Well, definitely. See, 19th century was the century of fields, and then 20th century came along with statistics and things. And I have all that reviewed as to what made me realize the difference. I mean, for instance, do you know that a Gaussian distribution reflects symmetry? So when physicists are talking about symmetry and net symmetry groups and so on, in statistics you call these Gaussian distributions. And how I learned about that and so on. And so I went from being a behaviorist, that's another big shift.
Some of the implications of the holonomic or holographic storage of memory and memories not having an edge would be that your memory, in fact, could exist inside of my head at this distance.
So if you will read my books.
Yes.
I mean, you don't have to get esoteric about this. Most of our memory is stored in our computers, our books, and so on. I mean, And yes, and the HeartMath people that do it, how far fields can extend, but they don't have trouble with fields. Well, there are two things about fields. You never can see a field, you only see its effects. You can count things, you can't count fields. So this is the big objection to my work, for instance, because I'm back in the 19th century, as the book we've used for of my language of brain said. Pribram, take us back to the 19th century. We've already left that. We no longer have to worry about the frequency of electrical responses. We now have spikes, and we can count them. And we no longer, in behavior, we no longer talk about consciousness and all this fuzzy stuff. We have behavior.
Interesting twist to the spikes versus field. The Mayo Clinic, in their initial laboratory after they translated Berger in 1930 and built their laboratory, they became famous because their ability to localize tumors. Yeah. Now, the entire event was a mistake. They had made new electrodes out of a metal, where they had to make their own electrodes. You had a big quartz plate, and you drop a solder bead on it, stick a wire in it, and smash it. No, that's enough. You got a flat electrode with a wire in it, and that's what you'd use. But they had a different metal than the wire, and they were having bimetallic spikes. Whenever they used this electrode that they had made, and by pure happenstance, they put this electrode that created spikes by pure accident over where the electrodes were laying over the tumor area. 5 cases in a row, double blind. Take them to the X-ray lab, and they predicted the location exactly. Now, they didn't tell anybody until Charles Yeager retired, Professor Emeritus, after having moved to California and started Langley Porter and all of that. When he retired, he wrote a little note about the event. He said that they had mistaken these spikes as being the real signal because everybody knew spikes were in the brain. But these slow field things they dismissed as being artifact. And in retrospect, after they realized that it was just this damn electrode, they reanalyzed their data and found the slow focus was in fact the real data, not the spike. But having gained this huge reputation of being able to localize tumors with the EEG, they didn't rat themselves out. But we all know now, if you look for the slow focus in the EEG, not the spike for the tumor location.
That's a great story.
Speaking of serendipity, all of the EEG amps that we use now, that are transistorized amps, they're the nice push-pull or bipolar amps, all of these spun out of a dinner conversation of yours that was overheard by a grad student, Frank Offner. The Offner T-type. The first transistorized EEG machine was made by an engineered grad student.
It wasn't transistorized. They didn't have transistors.
Well, he made the first transistorized one as well. But he did the chopper stabilization at that point.
Oh, yeah. He did the first EEG, not amplification. He and Grass were the two people who did it, the Offner and Grass machines.
Yeah.
Even today.
Yeah. So Offner was sold to Beckman, and Beckman was sold to Tekka, and Tekka is now Nicolay. And so the lineage of all the modern EEG equipment spins from a dinner conversation overheard by an engineer.
I went like this. We recorded from auditory cortex, and the loudspeaker went poof, poof. We could hear it. It was Gerard's laboratory. It was a big 1936 or so. It was 37 at the latest. And I said to Frank, if you can record a cardiogram, why can't you record this? Why do you need a loudspeaker? If you do it on a loudspeaker, you should be able to do it on an oscilloscope.
But this weird baseline drift was corrected by his instrument by resetting the baseline with a little reed oscillator at 200 hertz. I've got one of those. In fact, I've got Charlie Yeager's when he retired. I had one back in Dakota when I was there. But it's a fabulous old amp. We rebuilt it, made it fully functional, DC to 100 hertz. Fabulous amp. But you could hear them if they weren't working right, because the 200 hertz was tuned to 200 hertz, and if you got something that was a couple of hertz off, you'd hear this beat frequency. So it was always, you always knew when you had to send it to the shop. Great old things. And the original EEG amps were big tube amplifiers that you could heat a room with, a kilowatt of energy to power them up.
You couldn't take it around to do any back.
Gibbs hometown.
That was actually a recording that was done as a second interview. The first interview was done, and nobody knew Karl's work well enough to actually interact with him about it, to get him to talk about it well. And he's not going to give you a lecture. If you have a conversation with him, it's a good interview. But you don't, And can you tell me what your your world famous, life has been about? I mean, just, go ahead. You got to be able to interact about it. So this time they brought me in to end up interacting with them a little bit, and they re-recorded it. Now, Michael Cohen with EEG Spectrum as a corporate entity was doing the recording, and we were in Winterbrain in Palm Springs, and the little hotel rooms have those little air conditioners, and this thing has this high pitched little scream in the background, and Karl's voice is so faint that this whole thing was recorded. But they sent me the recording, and they said we can't use it because you can't hear Karl, and all you hear is the screaming mimi of a AC in the background. So when they did the documentary about me, the sound engineers that they used in Sacramento were pretty good. I asked them to do an ICA extraction of the sound of the AC, and to boost Karl's voice the best they could. And it turned out, I think, okay. You do have to turn up the volume because it's not loud when Karl's speaking, but I think the content of the interaction was worth putting back out there after resurrecting the recording from the graveyard of old recordings.
What year was this happening?
I'm at a loss.
Around.
I'm at a loss for that for the moment.
Mid 2000s.
Somewhere in that range.
Yeah. Nobody's going to fact check our homework. I was just wondering, because you're always a dapper looking gentleman, Jay. I'm just saying back then you.
So here's my last recollection of Karl.
Okay. He didn't hurt you too bad.
Yeah, actually, it did. I've got a torn bicep on my right arm and a dislocating shoulder. Yeah, but he was 95. This was 2008 or 9.
Okay.
He got the award at the APA for his career, and I had a booth showing QEEG and stuff to the APA, and I was in the booth and finished the shift, and that area was being shut down, so we were heading to dinner, and there's a cafe for something quick, and then it says Napa. Now this is in Orlando, so Napa wasn't like Napa here. It was the name of a good restaurant, with tablecloths and wine stacked to the ceiling, kind of a place. And I'm thinking, good food or fast food, And I look over and I see Karl's got white hair to his shoulders, and he's got a sweater over his shoulders, and he's facing the other way, and I recognize him, and I say, Karl, and he turns around and said, Jay, what are you doing here? And I said, I got a booth. What are you doing here? I got this lifetime achievement thing tomorrow, So, and I said, well, can I take you to dinner? And he said, well, my wife, Catherine Neville, she's actually on the Smithsonian board. She's an author, a well-known author, younger than him. She's my age, basically. But and I said, well, I'll take you both to dinner. You can go to Napa here, and we'll have a nice dinner. And I called Cynthia Curson, who had been in the booth with me, and she was tired at the end of the day. She said, I'm going to go crash in the room and order room service. So I called her and said, Karl Pribram and his wife, Catherine Neville, are going to have dinner with me in Napa, if you can be down here. And by the time I was hanging up the phone, she was there, So, zoop, right there, Johnny. She took this picture. Now, we had a wonderful dinner. All the alcohol you see there, none of it was mine. But when the bill came, I snatched it, and Karl wouldn't have it, and I said, well, I'll arm wrestle you for it, and he took me took me up on it. He's 95. It was everything I could do to beat him. I got a freaking bad shoulder, a bad arm, but anyway, you can see he's missing a finger.
That's not AI.
No. His middle finger got bitten by Lucy, his monkey. When she was pregnant, she had a baby, and he went to the cage, and he set his hand on top of the cage, and she jumped up and bit. And she was just being protective of her baby, and she wasn't nasty with him. It was a Mac monkey he had worked with for a long time. Anyway, gangrene set in. He lost the tip of his finger. So I cut 4 fingers off. We had missing finger stuff in common, So.
Well, Jay, I'm going to pop that video in here because we did a segment a few years ago. So, somebody you should know in neurofeedback, and he was definitely one of them. And I think it's good to bring it up to the surface again, see if the gods of the algorithms will pick up on it and promote it for you, Jay.
Well, Karl was a spectacular, brilliant man, way ahead of his time, talking about holographic or holonomic memory storage as an interference pattern, the distributed function of things in the brain. He was a neurosurgeon who was in one of the first group to become boarded in neurosurgery. And he quit doing neurosurgery about the year I was born and went into researching about consciousness and, language of the brain. He's a brilliant man. I was blessed to have met him and known him. So.
Well, we're gonna promote him one more time, Jay.
I met him in Palm Springs, Winter Brain in Palm Springs, and he came in and he showed a rapidly swirling pattern of his EEG slowed down by 5 times. It's this rapidly swirling pattern from the peak voltage to the trough voltage, red to blue assignment. So he showed this, and he basically said, "We just came up with this display. Does anybody know what it means?" And that's what you do in science. You come up with something, you show it and see what people think about it. And he was very, very genteel with the audience's responses, because most of them were just total bozo answers. Oh, I think it might be this. I think it might be that. That's an interesting idea. That's a thought. And my mind was just spinning on it, and the next morning, about 6 a.m., I hit the pool, which was not heated, and so it's cold water. But I'm a lap swimmer, so I was swimming laps, and once you get a few hundred yards in, you get your own heat. So anyway, I swam some and got out. I was drying myself off, and out comes Karl, and he goes over, and I figure it's cold. This isn't gonna last long,
Yeah.
He steps down the ladder and lays on his back and kind of skulls around a little bit, for a little bit, and he comes back out, and he stands out into the only sunny spot in the early morning, and starts to dry himself off, and he's kind of facing a little bit off the other way, drying his back, and I said, "Dr. Pribram, I think I might have an idea of what your EEG pattern was." And he didn't even slow down his drying of his back or turn around. He says, kind of like, "Oh yeah, well, is there another stupid idea out there?" It's kind of, and I think it might be traveling waves, the work of John Hughes. And he stopped. He just froze, and he turned around and he said, "Johnny's work. Who the hell are you?" So that's how we met.
That's how you met.
Yeah. So yeah, but it was the right answer.
Right.
Anyway,
Great show. Another great video. Every Wednesday, 6 p.m. Central Time, 6 p.m. We all get together. We nerd out. Every October, we get together, celebrate somebody's birthday, Jay.
yeah, well, it'll be 77 this year. So so
Dude,
it creeps up on you. I'm going to end up providing the cake for the dinner, and the photo booth for everybody to take funny pictures with, and we'll have some interesting discussions. Um, the autism spectrum is quite commonly kind of a disparaging term, and we're trying to come up with a different language for it. The divergent function, and we've actually got some good presentations on this from a good psychiatrist out of Munich is coming over to talk about her work on hypermirroring in children. And anyway, we've got some reframing the perception of what the autism spectrum is all about.
Suisun
Anyway,
Summit.
it should be fun. A good science and a good dinner. And I don't know whether I'm going to have my beard available for the shave, because I hear there's somebody coming with a $5,000 donation that wants to shave me for the $5,000 donation, and in which case that they can shave me for $5,000 any day. So and it's a good way to fund students,
So why
But
don't we
if
bring
it,
it?
if it's still there, it'll be auctioned off at the event. But if it goes ahead of time for 5, that's the way it is,
So why don't we bring it up in January if it's in October? Because the thing's sold out live. I mean, you can still get the videos, but if you want to be at live, you better keep your SuisunSummit.com. Keep your eyes open for those tickets because they go quick.
Yeah, and we're gonna have a very short early bird discount. So pick them up quick at a discount because again they do sell out. We had quite a few that did it live streaming.
Right.
And anyway, it's good to see you this morning.
Jay, get some more water, chill out. Good luck on your next hourly appointment.
I'm probably still another quart low, So.
All right, buddy. Take care. Have a great weekend. Say hi to Renita.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey everyone, if you're enjoying the show and want to help us keep it going, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Your support helps improve the content and brings on great guests and grow the show. Join us on Patreon at patreon.com/NeuroNoodle. But hey, if supporting financially isn't in the cards right now, no worries. You can still help us out for free by liking, subscribing, and sharing this episode. It really makes a difference and helps more people find the show. If we've earned it, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. The NeuroNoodle podcast is supported by listeners and businesses just like you.
Hey everyone, here's a quick message from our good old buddy Joshua Moore at Alternative Behavioral Therapy.
I'm preparing to do an introduction to QEEG phenotypes. This is my first workshop on the topic, and this is just the introductory overview of the project. This is going to be very, very basic. So let's review each phenotype. We're just going to go through them one by one. If you look at the DSM-1, 2, or 3, and you look at the first chapter, it actually acknowledges that the DSM in mental health is just, quote, a descriptive adaptation, unquote. We're going to customize the interventions and tailor them to the individual's brain activity, not just applying the treatments or trainings to the individual's phenotype and maybe even their variants, but also customizing the protocols themselves to fit that person's individual unique frequency patterns. Maybe a dozen ways to have excessive energy in your nervous system, and then there's an infinite amount of ways to relate poorly to that excessive energy, which means that there is a lot of variations in what someone might call anxiety. And that doesn't mean that we're talking about the same thing when we're talking about anxiety. So complicated stuff. But when we look at a brain map, we get some basis in which we can start talking about what is this energy. Then we have to go to the client. We have to start talking to the client about what is your association to this specific kind of energy that I can see now. Then we get to care about things that insurance doesn't restrict us on. We get to care about the person in a broader way. 85% improvement in mental health report following pairing a medication with a specific phenotype. Geez. Okay, have you seen 85% in any mental health studies for any medication? I'm going to be going over a whole bunch of different types of tests, assessments, and things that can be used that have things called neurocorrelates, which you saw some of those already, better success outcomes. That's what we really want. We need better predictive power. We need better individualization. That's what we want.